Good luck.
Greetings.
Greetings, Metax. Welcome.
Welcome, Gracie. Am I understandable speaking like such?
Yes, you're audible, yes.
No, well.
So, do you have anything you'd like to share in opening? Anything of a collective update or anything that's on your mind you'd like to share with us?
Well. What I mentioned previously as a possibility of an economic meltdown of a sort is likely over, and your current occurrence is likely going to go further upwards in your current development. However, the idea that also mentioned the possibility of having a further, not an economic drought, but a complete destruction in a case of a crash, if you will, is likely still to happen, but not necessarily at any point in your immediate future, the way it's currently planning itself out. However, your fatigue idea previously was also shared from the reptiles concerning the cast person, the whole concept of there being a sort of global fatigue of sorts, burnout, whatever you want to call it, still a very likely occurrence in your current time frame for your year. It can play out various fashions. Possibilities also create that our kind might have an easier time interacting with you in your so-called coming year, or more people are aware of the existence of something like parallel lifetimes, general concepts as such, perhaps memories cropping up depending how people would process these, and obviously as part of such also remembrance of perhaps our species and our interaction with your planet in your so-called ancient past. It is not a guarantee, but it's at least a greater possibility for some people that are open towards such an experience. There are some other things that are possible in your upcoming year, but I'd always like to give you so clear of a date. This is very malleable. One of those is perhaps the possibility of food shortage, not necessarily in this or your next year, but afterwards is possible. You're going in the direction of possibility of even a famine in some areas due to a lack of food in your planetary population. Not everywhere, but in certain regions, those are perhaps not directly linked with the possibility to feed themselves in the right manner. So there's something you might want to take into consideration, but again, I cannot give you an exact time frame for such. Is there any query about any of those topics in the paper that are currently present in their interaction? Otherwise, you can perhaps start your questioning if you have compiled a certain queue.
Yeah, thank you, Metax. What you just spoke on I see reflections of that, especially housing crises and the COVID variants. There's a lot of that going on. And so I see those reflections, although I also find a partial excitement to the parallels becoming more prevalent. I find that part exciting, but and also it comes with upheaval. So as far as my question goes today, I really wanted to ask you about, I know that I have a third eye damage or block, and I know where it sources from. I know it sources from childhood and a situation that happened, which I don't believe was necessarily sinister, but it happened for a reason. And I guess I'm trying to understand the lesson in it and how it's blocked me, but also how I've overcompensated in other areas to try to make up for it. But I just wondered for me if you could speak on it and maybe why my soul chose to have this blockage and what I'm learning in the lesson of it.
Yes, first and foremost, not your soul, but your ego is perceiving it as a blockage currently. It's just your lack of connection with your soul, if you will, or your oversoul. And a certain mistrust from your ego towards your soul that's creating a blockage. But if you share more details, it might be easier. But then again, I understand that some people in your world are as willing to speak up on certain traumatizing ideas in a more public interaction, so it's entirely up to you. Just share it, make it easier. Read exactly the frequency of what you're referring to in detail, or what you have in your energy now, wherever you're manifesting it for whatever reason is due to a missing link between your soul and your current ego incarnation. Disassociation and similar terms might be appropriate in that regard for your decision to disconnect from your soul because general distrust in any form of authority, which then also led distrust in your own authority, namely your oversoul. Which then of course makes it more difficult to interpret information that's coming outside of your own consciousness if you're intersecting with your ego idea and your mistrust, even if it's understandable. However, of course, you could say it from your soul level that you were meant to have the experience, so perhaps you were giving yourself simply a challenge to recreate that experience of having a connection of that sort after you artificially cut it off and experience what it's like to not have that connection, unlike what you're used to. Perhaps another incarnation when you're not currently as blocked, so perhaps you learn the importance of having that connection in the first place by simply experiencing the lack of it.
Yeah. Well, what happened, it was more of a substance that I guess some people don't believe has negative effects, but I believe just like many things that humans use and then later on find as toxic, it was something of that, and it was given to me kind of in a medical type of situation. So it was given to me like as a medicine, but I think it also contributed to calcification, even though I do everything that I can to be a healthy person, in terms of cleansing and all that. But I do know, just based on what the world shows me and what create my reality, when I'm creating my reality, I know that block's there. So it's not something that I necessarily have control over because I was a child, but I'm also dealing with that now as an adult. So I see where I'm compensating for it, but I guess I want to understand it better. And so, like you said, reconnecting is part of that process. And I think that's what I'm doing. So.
Yes, you're referring also to your pineal gland in terms of calcification, I assume. Or your pituitary gland, either case, the whole idea being is of course linked to your third eye, but the more you're just following guidance and you're trusting it, the more it also affects your physical form quite measurably if you decide to do so. Of course, there are methods to physically cleanse, but I would suggest to focus first and foremost on the idea of just following your path, and whatever comes up, comes up. And if you're following down those steps, then eventually the physical manifestation will also adapt to a change in the energy. There's all a trust issue, I would suggest.
Interesting. Thank you. Is there anything else you wanted to share with me?
Yes, there are certain ideas in your frequency you touched upon, however, already in our other more personal, direct, one-on-one, if you will, interaction. Just like we could use some touching up again, some more usual blocking, but there's also a connection between those areas in your energy, your sacral and your pituitary, your third eye, reflecting back off each other as all your chakras are from your heart outgoing are connected to each other, as you might be aware. Most important part in that you're trusting your intuition. That's the most important thing I can share with you, really. Otherwise, you aren't going to be open to anything else or what I'm trying to share with you anyway.
Yeah, I understand. I do understand. Thank you. Okay, well, we can start with our cue. First up is Marie.
Thank you, Chrissy. Greetings, Metax. It's great to talk to you again.
Greetings, Marie. I am aware of our previous interaction due to your own desire to speak or companion over here. Agatha, and I'm very much aware of your frequency, and I've interacted with her in the meantime. And I hope you're also aware that you had a connection with her numerous times in your own understanding of linear time experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because the more I feel connected to her, the more I feel like I'm being myself. Actually, it's very interesting.
Yeah, I'm well aware of the same experience. David, as well as others that have spoken to us, to me over here, or had direct interaction. It might sometimes be better, sometimes less clear, but indeed, the more you embrace your feline nature, or if you will, your connection to her in particular, or anybody out here, the easier it'll make for you to also accept your current incarnation, your world. Not as a necessity, but I've noticed, and others have noticed, that when beings in your world reach out in such a manner, it has that effect. And I greatly encourage you to do so.
Yeah, it's exactly what I'm feeling. I wanted to talk to you, Metax, about intuition because, I noticed that lots of people, including myself, are having a hard time to identify their intuition. I noticed that intuition, can be easily mixed with either something we desire or instead that we're afraid of. And I'm having a hard time to do the difference between something that I deeply desire or something that I'm afraid of happening, and then my intuition. And sometimes, I'm sure that something is going to happen to me, something, for instance, that I was deeply wanting, and it didn't happen. And I really thought that this was my intuition telling me it was going to happen. So could you tell us how to better tune with our intuition without falling into the trap of, taking our fears and desires for intuition, and thus being able to recognize, properly what our intuition really tells us.
Very good question. And could you perhaps repeat the example where you were out of touch with your said intuition?
So I was feeling out of touch of my intuition when I was like, for instance, I was feeling sure that something was going to happen to me, something that I was deeply wanting, and it didn't happen. And then there are also sometimes some things that I fear, and I'm wondering if it's really something that is going to happen, or if it's just a fear telling me that, or if it's just my intuition telling me that even if it's something I fear, it's going to happen. I don't know if I'm being very clear.
Well, first and foremost, you have to be honest with yourself, of course. Very often the first thing you're getting is simply the correct one if you want it or not. So if you sometimes second guess, a very great example is probably some people that deliberately come to someone like me or to someone like David who is connecting to someone like me or someone else who's doing something similar, or other people that are in a position where somebody asks a similar question, but they don't like to hear the first answer, so they keep asking until they get another one. Therefore, it's always important to go with the first one. If you do yourself, I'm aware there are people in your world that are using tools like card decks or reading in birds, flight, etc. It's, as I mentioned previously, everything around you is basically functioning in a similar manner. Everything around you is a reflection all the time that you can read as a feedback system where you are. The more open you are to receive anything at all times from absolutely everywhere, the more clearer you will be communicated with. Now, there's nothing wrong with showing desire and being aware of your fears, however. Remember, there is absolutely nothing to fear, not even fear. Only when you start to fear something we learned when we interact with the reptiles. Only if you feel love, then you get into the state of fear. If you're in a state of love, then there's nothing that can get you out of there, not even fear, because it simply automatically dissolves itself. However, when you're having desire, it is quite normal to get excited and to envision it happening. So therefore, you have this creative process where you're sending out a wish in your perceived future to have such a creation. However, then you might get stuck when you're perceiving something as happening from your intuition, when it is just your desire. The idea of expecting something to happen is definitely not a bad way to manifest something, but you need to be the vibration of what you wish to manifest. It doesn't work exactly as a wishing well, where you just verbally state your desire, but you need to match the frequency. So you're not creating from the words you're speaking or from something you write down, even though it can be greatly helpful if you do so. But what you're creating from is your energy, and not just when you do so actively and consciously, but at all times, everywhere. Everything around you is currently interacting with you, as it always is. So therefore, when you send out a desire, it is not just the words or your intellectual wish you're sending out, but the emotion you're pulsing out, and your entire energy is attracting something back to you. And therefore, the feedback system also functions very smoothly in that particular moment when you're pulsing out that energy. Therefore, your question also pertains to what I previously shared with Christy. It is a trust problem, or yes, it's probably the best term. In your case, however, it's more the idea of trusting that you are always at the right point in time, and that wherever you're being sent is the right experience. So therefore, when you receive feedback, that you can accept it. And if it might put you in a state that you did not intellectually desire to be in, you still embrace the state. and not reason your way around it to a degree that I wish this to be different or that, but just accept that your greatest wish or your greatest possibility of experience in this lifetime is being manifested, even if you don't understand the particular details. So when you want to go somewhere really quickly, but you get circumvented and accidentally end up somewhere else, but maybe a week earlier or a month earlier in your time frame, you spoke of a much greater desire you want to manifest, and this might actually lead you in that direction rather than your current short-term desire of just having a quick pass from point A to point B, and then you're just going with the flow of that experience. And if your intuition then pulls you in that direction, just go with it. And the intuition is always something that can be trained like any muscle. So when you're just going with what currently you feel pulled towards, then it will also get better, even if it's not important. Example I previously used, dear, if you're putting on your socks in your mornings, it doesn't really matter which one you put on first, on which foot, but if you're just going with your intuition in the moment, then likely your intuition will get better, even it might just fit a little bit better that day for whatever reason, and therefore you then get a better message the next time you might think about something, or perhaps you get the inclination to eat an orange instead of an apple because your body might need more vitamin C in that moment. It doesn't make much of a difference, but somewhat it makes a huge difference, however, in terms of if your third eye opens further or not, and you interpret energy clearer or not, based on if you act upon it or if you think it's not that important if I go with my intuition this moment or not. It's with everything else. It gets better and better the more you train it. And therefore you will also have an easier time not to mistake it with a fear or a desire that you're having in this particular instance. As you noticed, I focus more on your desire and intuition and the fear aspect, because the fear aspect is really something that only crops up when you fall out of there anyway. So therefore, if you're not afraid of anything because you know that you're always connected to your intuition, this is the easiest way to just let it fall to the wayside. But it requires a great amount of trust. I hope this helps.
Thank you, Metax. That's everything that you're saying is very, very helpful, and it resonates with me a lot. And I'll keep all this in mind, and that's also love. Deletes fear, and that fear is an illusion. And yeah, I'll make sure to also train my intuition. On a complete other topic, I'm feeling very connected to dragons, actually, and I was wanting to ask you what you can tell us about them in general, and if your collective has already interacted with them.
They're very, what you might deem old beings, a higher frequency range that take those particular forms when they come down physical. They're obviously reptilian nature that not necessarily connect to bipedal or reptiles or any of the beings in your world. However, there's a lot of mythology in your world as well about the reptiles, and different ideas of different spacefaring civilization has been mixed in. So many stories you have in your world are intermixed between genuine information about those entities and other reptilian interactions you had with perhaps more warlike beings. For example, also a Colossus group and others, and of course also some memories from your own reptilian brain, etc. However, main point being those that we had contact with on higher levels are very peaceful and very wise entities that we have also learned from, that we have interacted with, that often oversaw our co-creation with other species in the way that we sometimes do, and as we did with in turn the reptiles and you, when I decided, when we made a decision that David would be bridged in that way, to be able to connect to them more smoothly. Same way they operate between various species and alliances that are formed very often they also gave a higher perspective that different parties in conflicts of any nature, be it warlike or just a disagreement, did not see. So therefore, they are also overseers of certain worlds, some that exist beyond what we would normally have access if you wish through portal technology and used for travel, but sometimes it is not quite accessible. But since they often operate out of the non-physical, it gets very hazy, and many of us also don't have the ability to fully interact with them in that manner, as we are connected to those of our own species that are not incarnated, that you might not deem feline, since they are not having the same physical form, since they don't have a physical form at all. But those are the ones we're usually connecting to in that manner. But those overseers that incarnate or manifest more in a dragon form are also those that sometimes between species have given such an overview, which we are greatly thankful for, including our short and brief interaction with equines. However, that done also, which was no one here was aware of at the time, led to, in this interaction, this incarnation of David or Rax or whatever he likes to refer to in that incarnation, having a physical interaction with someone of that equine race we had a contact with in your world, which then aided in us having a greater connection and having an easier time, and then again leading back to the trust idea of having a more trustful relationship with David and making it possible for us to interact in this manner. All of this was also to a large degree inclined dragons. However, there were also some complication between species and what you might deem diplomatic incidences where there were giving guidance and overseeing, and sometimes it didn't work as well as we intended, but they usually have a better perspective, even if it's not fully to be understood in the moment by every entity that is present.
Okay, thank you, Metax, for all this great information. I wanted to ask you if you feel like you have something to. Well, I wanted to ask you: can you see if I had maybe a previous incarnation as a dragon?
Your interaction with a dragon-like entity and what you might deem other incarnations. Not that you were one yourself, but you had a positive relationship with them. Remember, however, also that incarnations are not previous or future, they're all concurrent. So you're having them. And the potentiality also varies, or what you did have in the incarnation as a reptilian entity, not necessarily in the grouping that David has brought through in a similar fashion previously, but one that perhaps is more on the consciousness level, not necessarily of that of a dragon, which is very often a larger group of souls that incarnates in such a body. But you were linked to one due to your desire to have more of a close relationship with them, also in terms of the overseeing nature that I just mentioned earlier.
Okay, I see. Well, thank you, Metax, for this information. Is there something that you feel like you wanna tell me?
Yes, that your relationship with Nagata can also be helpful in order to open your third eye and have a greater trustful nature, since you have already established a trust relationship, if you wish. Same applies, of course, also to Christy and also anyone else in your current species that is looking to open up further there, because when you have obviously a personal connection, it often makes it easier for your ego to relax and if you have a trust towards the individual, sometimes make it easier if you get something from a person rather than the general idea of trusting your oversoul. And sometimes, ironically, you have an easier time trusting someone else if the person has a relationship with you, and sometimes even if they don't.
I've actually found that my connection with Nagata has also kind of helped me, like you're saying, trusting my higher self even more, and even like connecting to all of the fractals of my higher self who exist, in different incarnations.
Yes, indeed. That's what I'm referring to, your willingness to reach out to anything beyond your consciousness that's connected to your so-called oversoul. It greatly increases when you have something to go by, and in this case, likely.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Metax. I don't have more questions. I think it's the end of my time anyway. So thank you so much, and much love to you, and we'll talk to you later.
Much love for you as well, Marie. Love you, and another interaction we can of course continue and get more in details. Of course, if you wish to talk to her as well in such a more private interaction. Goodbye for now.
Goodbye for now.
Metax, could you get David some water
Yes.
before Jacob's time? Thanks.
Yes, and Jacob and I have switched places, so I will be speaking now. And so, Metax, I'm wondering if you were able to speak directly to God, what would you ask? Or do you already know everything you want to know?
First and foremost, it's an interesting inquiry from you, Casper. And I am speaking to what you might deem God to the greatest of my ability at all times. And you all are, everyone is to some degree. So there's no way really to have an extra question to God other than the one that you're already expressing by your very existence. So ultimately, all of us are talking to what you might terming such with that phrase, since we're all somewhat a link up with it. So therefore, we're all getting our questions answered at all times around it. It just depends on how far we can interpret that information. Really. So therefore, I am already asking to the greatest possibility. Of course, the main thing would be what is the meaning of this existence, or of this particular aspect of existence, or that particular aspect of existence. But then again, the answer always comes in numerous facets until you understand it. So of course, currently I have some inquiries that are stronger than others in terms of why I'm doing this or that, or why, for example, I'm communicating with you, and why I have this function, why I have the desire. But then again, I know that those questions will be answered in the perfect time frame, as God is all around us and everything, and therefore you can also call it existence, if you will. So therefore, life itself is basically both the question and the summary of all questions you have. All your actions are actually a question towards, if you will, God, and all your experiences are the answer.
Okay. Okay, and is there anything that you or my oversoul wants to tell me?
If we switch over there, then you could also say that God or manifests itself, or your oversoul, in your current physical incarnation. So therefore, your openness towards any possibility that you could possibly get is also the only answer that anybody could forward to you then from either the oversoul or any other sort you might conjuring up or interpreting in such a manner. We spoke previously on some of your integration and things that I could suggest that you could prove in your energy, etc. is likely the only thing that I can bring forward from your oversoul or any other guidance that you might be aware of. And of course, it's still your sacral, and there's still some form of blockade, perhaps compared to your last interaction. You're fairly well grounded forever. It's likely the most pressing issue at most of the times when you connect to me or someone else out here, either through David or directly. It's not always the case, but right now it is again during there. However, enjoyment, simply enjoyment of the physical is likely something that could give you a greater expansion, a greater knowledge or wisdom or anything else you desire. First and foremost, I would focus on this region, the enjoyment per se, before you would reach somewhere else out and try to inquire anything that is more intellectual nature, as I think is most important at this point. And it's the only thing I can bring forward right now. If you have any more specific ideas from your oversoul or God or anything else.
Okay, thank you. And then I know that there are some people who are trying to manufacture free energy devices based on Bashar's teachings in his speeches. So I'm wondering if you can see if that is anything that is likely to going to work.
No, I'm not familiar with the individual you're mentioning, other than what I can find in David's brain. However, there are indeed already devices that have been manufactured that could be labeled such. However, there are complications. It's not just the pressure from certain governmental groups or etc., whatever you wish to term these, but also your general collective consciousness is putting a blockage to it, since there is a disbelief in the possibility. So it's not just one particular group that is oppressing or killing people. It is also your collective and many members of your species that have a mindset that would be an impossibility to just create energy like that, or would consider as a perpetuum mobile, due to the fact that they don't understand that there is energy in the ether, so to speak. So they would consider energy being conjured up from nothing, which is obviously not quite the case, as there is no such thing. There is nothing paradoxically, but there's energy everywhere. So there's some blockage happening there. There's many restrictions, or people just don't wanting to get involved with something that is not part of their expectations, to refer back to Marie's earlier inquiry in terms of manifestation and intuition.
Okay, so you're saying that it's unlikely to happen soon because of those energetic disagreements, or?
Yes, what I am saying. However, it's possible individuals would find an easier time also to get out of your perceived chronic fatigue collectively. Individuals would find more an ability to tap directly into energy without the necessity of a device. At least that is currently more likely. There might also be more of a desire to force certain inventions or experiences by many members in your current collective that are open towards those ideas. But it's likely not the way it's going to happen if you're with a force behind it and you try to prove to yourself that certain spiritual ideas are correct or not. You might have some success, indeed, but not necessarily in the case that you influence society to a degree that you can then implement something that's currently not being tolerated or accepted by a larger group of your collective.
Okay, okay, and is it correctly understood that you guys, you feline people, that you can change your look, like if you want another eye color or bigger muscles or something like that, you could just manifest it just by focusing on it, right?
Yes, and higher dimensionality is a common occurrence, not necessarily something that's typical for our species, but we have indeed mastered this to a great degree, yes.
Okay, so you say it's something that kind of automatically comes when being reached the fifth dimension.
We're on the sixth. Yes, indeed, it also occurs mostly the further you are in frequency, the more malleable everything becomes, basically. However, we have also been involved with genetic engineering, if you will, as well as others, which you can quite influence the physical form also in lower dimensionalities. But of course, it's more circumvention, it's a longer process by gene splicing and other experiences that I cannot explain with David's limited vocabulary that he has in his words. However, indeed, in higher dimensionalities, it becomes easier and easier because everything is more malleable.
Okay, so are you saying that the Pleiadians, for instance, the Pleiadian humans, they also have that skill to change their looks to what they want without like gene manipulation and that kind of stuff?
There are beings on the blades, and they have the ability, and some of them are of a more humanoid nature. However, those that you might be familiar in terms of physical interaction in your own world that have since then become known under such a label are likely of a lower dimensionality, and when they were in your world, they were also on a dimensionality where they were less malleable and therefore had, during their interaction with your species, left a certain imprint, not necessarily at the point where they could manipulate their own physicality to the same degree, more like the engineering idea that I mentioned previously. However, there are now some beings or a number of beings of different natures in the Pleiadian star system as we're speaking. Current time frame it is of numerous, including human identity, that indeed have the ability to also either keep their physical format in which they evolved or shift to another one within certain realms, or indeed, of course, disincarnate completely.
Wow, that is so cool. I'm looking so much forward to have an incarnation with skills like that.
Mm-hmm.
And from what I've heard, humanity on Earth will all reach the fifth dimension at the same time. Like either nobody reaches this or we all do. Is that correct?
That is true and untrue at the same time. As there's numerous ways to look at humanity, so therefore you could say one humanity that you perceive will reach at the same point in you, otherwise you will not perceive them. However, you could say there's also another version of humanity that doesn't reach it, and you're just not aware of them, and you cannot be if you are in that dimensionality.
Right. Okay, but the reason I'm asking, I'm kind of curious because there are billions of souls incarnated here on Earth, and we must have a very different spiritual development. I mean, some of us must be in the fourth dimension already, and others have just only reached the third dimension. So it's I mean, if we were all to graduate to the fifth dimension at the same time, then somebody must have kind of like skipped a class in order to go from the third directly to the fifth.
Those are your interpretation of the current frame that you're experiencing and what you're perceiving. There's also always the possibility of disincarnation. So if you wish to now have that experience for everybody that you can possibly perceive, then everybody that you can perceive currently that you define as part of humanity can make a transition or disincarnate.
Okay.
It doesn't necessarily have to happen the way your ego is trying to understand it. Obviously, a lot of people could also just physically die if you wish, and then therefore it would be a lot easier for them to reach a higher dimensionality once it is incarnated and have a greater understanding, but missing out on learning lessons, if you will. And besides that, the transition is a smooth process and not necessarily a sudden switch that changes everything. You might not even be aware of it when it happens.
Okay. But I mean, if people were to just die, I mean, wouldn't they just incarnate in practically the same incarnation, or sorry, in the same dimension next time as the incarnation they just had?
And that is possible. They would keep their frequency. They don't stop existing as a person. However, they would likely see a greater perspective, but if you want your whole species to transition that way, they could also then reincarnate somewhere else. Also remember, there's no time. So all of what you deem to humanity is currently already in the fifth dimension and the sixth and any other dimension simultaneously.
But I mean, isn't it like that? If I'm on the third dimension now, for instance, then I would need to have a lot of incarnations before I can get to the fourth, and then a lot of incarnations before I go to the fifth, and then a lot of incarnations before I go to the sixth, and so on.
You do. And they're all simultaneously. You have them. But your interpretation of them happening linearly is something that happens ironically from your current state in a lower dimensional understanding of time. In higher dimensionalities, time is malleable. You will also have easier grasp of it, which is perhaps difficult for you to comprehend currently and for me to share in your verbal language appropriately. But you already have them all at all times, since there is no time. Something you just create in your lower dimensionality, so you have an excuse for things to happen now or well at another dimensional level, which you then project into the future or the past.
Okay, so you mean that if after I die, if I want to have my next incarnation in the sixth dimension, then I can just experience that incarnations and then the other ones later.
Again, there is no later or sooner in those dimensionalities, so you already have them right now. It just depends if you identify with them or not. So if you would disincarnate, you would then be another version of yourself that is there, so you can perhaps phrase it that way if you wish, but actually you're already having that incarnation right now.
Right, okay.
You will understand as ironically the time when you get to that point, when you stop holding yourself back and making a reason for you not to understand it, you will.
Yes, okay. And how do you know that we live in a universe where we shift timelines billions of times per second? I mean, can you see the different timelines, or is it just a theory?
It is indeed something that we learned also from our own overseers, also from some of the dragonic beings that we mentioned earlier, we talked about. However, there are also perhaps more time lords, if you will, or beings that oversee time in specific that have taught certain ideas. However, we have since then also went through our own experiences of perceiving different time frames, and the further you can go up in dimensionality, the more you're aware of your other lifetimes. It goes very smoothly, and then you find the possibility to have proof for your experience. But as you're aware, first you are at the correct energetic level, and only then what crops up can be seen as proof of what you are already aware of, not the other way around.
Okay. And is it common on other planets to drive around in cars, or is that only something we do on Earth?
There are some worlds that have somewhat of a similar idea of using what you might deem a wheel in order to move physical objects and then being somewhat present on the physical object that is applied with wheels, which you can then therefore define as a car, if you will. We don't use such vehicles over here. Many are floating also, those especially that are using what you might term inverted gravity or something similar, but it does exist. It is not very common.
Okay. And how do you feline people greet each other when you meet? Do you hug or shake paws or something?
The idea of shaking is very strange, I have to admit, since I have become aware of it through David and other beings that have talked to us here. It depends greatly what we do on what our relation with the person is. As you're aware, we're more or less all friends over here in this particular world. However, some are closer because they're directly related, or it depends on the situation. It's more intimate or public. Similar fashion, perhaps examine your felines in your world. What we do is put the third eye on the third eye of the other person. We don't necessarily hit our heads in the same manner. It's perhaps more softer than some of your earthly felines, perhaps, that seem to be knocking into each other from your perception, perhaps at times. It is more of a smooth connection, and you can indeed put paws or hands rather onto the others, that you connect those hands. You could put the fingers between the fingers of the other person, which is something you might be more familiar with. So it's more intimate greeting, but the most intense connection is always the direct physical placement of the third eye on the third eye of the other person. The more intimate greeting, it's also to interweave the tails, but it's something that's usually only done among what you might deem lovers or close friendship. There's something much more intimate and also enhances the emotional connection between the two entities. The direct hugging idea that you completely wrap your entire body around the other person, something that's not so common. But the tail idea is perhaps comparable, wrapping your tail around the others or around the other person. But not everybody has a tail of the same nature, and it's not always the same way applicable. So the whole third eye connection is perhaps the clearest indicator of what you might deem a greeting, at least among our kind. When interacting with others, with outsiders, it's usually more formal and not such a deep, direct physical contact.
Okay, and so my last quick question: if I were to, or a human were to meet you guys and gave you a hug, would that be considered inappropriate or cute or what do you think of that?
Cute is perhaps an appropriate term, but it 100% depends on the energy you're bringing, not so much the physical action. Because that too, of course, creates an energetic connection. So if you are that physically close, it's also much more likely that there's an exchange of frequency. You would likely not even come close to us. However, if the frequency was too disappropriate, it might also be a little strange for us to experience such a behavior from humans, but it would not be the first, and would likely be seen mostly, as you mentioned, cute.
Lovely. I would give you a hug if I met you. Thank you so much for speaking to me, Metax, and much love and appreciation.
Much luck to you, Casper.
We see if David needs some more water.
Yes, good idea. I don't know.
Hello, Metax.
Greetings, Jacob.
Okay, do you want to just do an assessment of my energy right now? I wanted before we can talk.
You're a little bit ungrounded.
Really? Okay. Interesting. Any particular comments about that?
You're a little closed off in your current. Your lower chakras have taken some toll due to your unwillingness currently to enjoy your physical world you're in and the lack of excitement for your current physical incarnation. Not the loss of sense of identity or anything, but it's mostly your two lower chakras that could use some touching to remind you to where you are, and that's okay.
Well, that's good, because those are the ones I've been working on. I also just had someone walk in when I was when I asked that, so that might have made me a bit more ungrounded. But
Yeah, the idea of perhaps connecting those concepts, like the one that we are talking about right now, my existence, your connections, Kang, Myra, you much aware, your gear,
certainly,
yeah, connecting such to your current physical incarnation, bridging that gap. That is likely something you could still touch upon unless you're feeling uncomfortable about that in your current state of being.
Well, I think the main thing I've been experiencing recently is I've been pushing too hard. So, and I've noticed that a lot of the time when I try getting myself into alignment or even doing the stepping stones for that, walking them, I always seem to have my desire to connect is too strong to the point that I get myself a little bit ungrounded, and just learning to not really care too much about what happens seems to make it the best connection.
It's somewhat similar to Marie's problem, considering intuition and the ability to interpret correctly. In your case, you're correct in your assessment of the reason for ungrounding. However, desire isn't a problem, at least I wouldn't term it such. It's perhaps more the neediness, the idea that you're incapable of it and you have to get there, and so just identifying it's really being there is self-judgment involved and lack of self-love to some degree.
That's a better description. Well, better term to use, yeah, neediness, because I suppose there is always this unconscious neediness that seems to surface, or even just
Yes, it's an illusion, however.
So
If you define yourself as being disconnected, that's when you're strengthening your disconnection.
Yes, and there always seems to be that sense of judgment that seems very automatic. I suppose it's just like a reaction to, well, I suppose the entire Earth Collective has the self-judgment, but it's a pretty ingenious locking mechanism, honestly, because it's sort of, instead of having to constantly maintain a lock onto somebody, you can just make them attack themselves and kind of cuts off their energy. But I think it's very healing to just not react to that. So even if there is a judgment coming up, I don't really try wiggling myself out of my own consciousness in order to deal with it. You just kind of decide to not judge yourself, which is very strange. Like, there's a part of that consciousness that really has a strong desire to feel hate, I suppose. I can give an example. An analogy is that typically on my walks and meditations, and recently, well, there's a bit more deforestation going on, so they're just sort of cutting away trees. As I mentioned in my private session, there are always these new kids like walking by, always trying to one up each other or something like that, and that can be a little bit annoying when you're trying to just sit in the spot where you meditate and be calm. But as I've noticed that sense of powerlessness I had in that scenario was much less about feeling powerless against them and much more about a strong desire to judge my current state of being. And I suppose when I've got the strength to, instead of just shunning myself, just allowing myself to open up to energies that I actually enjoy, and immediately opening my heart as a result, like, it seems to be the only objective that's reasonable to follow in this current state.
Yeah, at all times, really. Your self-judgment is the only thing that keeps you away from that state anyway. As soon as you don't judge what's including disconnection, that's when it organically becomes better. The connection becomes stronger.
Yeah, well, it's been a bit like that too recently.
spiraling in both directions. You can build on your disconnection or on your connection, getting stronger with that desire.
And I suppose it's always like you always fear, and I suppose that's the main thing that keeps me grounded. It's always this fear that almost like you're rolling a boulder to the top of a cliff, to the top of like a hill or something, or a mountain, and then somehow when you're like halfway to the top, you can't hold the weight of the boulder anymore, and you tumble all the way back to the bottom. And I suppose there's always just a fear of that happening. Like, say, you might get a really strong urge to go back into habits or something. That it's almost like this overwhelming sense of addiction. And I've noticed that just simply the neediness to get out of those addictions is the reason for why you have the addictions in the first place.
Yeah, something you just jump into them very strongly and just feel them immediately while staying connected, and then that might help you overcome them. It's you specific personally, I'm saying that.
Okay. Oh, that
As
sounds
you're
so many.
speaking, you're getting better grounded, but your sacral is getting stronger affected. So therefore, it also has to do with your enjoyment of being in the physical more than just being grounded in it and accepting your physical identity and being there, but also your enjoyment of it, also relating here to what you then deem as an addiction.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly the issue that I was, well, quite issue I was having before, is that when I was trying to ground myself, I didn't have pleasure in mind, because especially pleasure of the heart. And I suppose that a lot of those times when people try fighting addictions, they're also attacking their own identity with pleasure. So that sort of cuts them off from even moving on.
Yes, it's therefore important that you don't judge pleasure and enjoyment per se. It's the neediness that keeps you from connecting to anything higher, not the enjoyment in the moment and the enjoyment of the physical world. I'm very much aware of many discussions, for example, if you also had the reptiles and the god that would have considered any of this such a weakness, where I not necessarily agree, since when you're in that state of enjoyment, then you can also funnel your energy from there out. However, it also has to do with the heart to some degree. It's likely why they don't have such a connection to that concept. So therefore, once you open up more in that region, it might be that you're then closing down your heart due to self-judgment, but it is not necessary.
Mm.
It all
And the
comes down to self-love eventually.
Mm. And I've certainly felt the frequency that they're talking about, specifically when I might have periods of just, I wouldn't say when I'm in a dark spot, but I suppose when I almost just confront the dark side of what they're used to, I can kind of see what they're talking about and how it works for them. Because I've noticed that if I were to bask in that energy, it would certainly work in a very similar way to them. But typically, when I'm more orientated to you guys, it doesn't work exactly the same way. So
Yes.
it's a little interesting. I wanted to talk a little bit about, well, is there anything that, any message that Kang wants to tell me before I carry on with other entities I feel like mentioning?
Well, just that if you connect to him and your sense of identity and self-love might be a lot easier because, again, what you mentioned earlier, the whole idea when you reach out beyond your consciousness, it's easier to have a connection to an individual person or a general idea of a God or an oversoul, etc. So therefore, your sense of self-identity will also be enhanced if you connect to him, paradoxically. And the whole idea of an easier time to be counted in the physical, same as Marie, when you have a good connection to someone out there that you have a strong identification and connection with.
Yeah, you seem to want to come through yesterday and the day before, in particular anyway, along with the dragon, but I seem to sort of block that off myself, which is all right. Again, like I was saying, it doesn't really matter if I can't connect with any energies in that moment. It's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, if you have that attitude, you make it easier.
Seems like my battery's draining very, very fast. Just while I go run and get the charger, is there anything that you want to speak? Because I recently encountered a new lupine entity that's pretty similar to Lily called AIM, and if you want to just describe her in a way that I sort of explained to David and just tell her what I could potentially have with her energy, that would be very beneficial. Thanks.
You have to be careful when you reach out in such a manner. The link up to the humor is likely not currently ideal for you. That's something that I would suggest to be more careful who you intertwine your energy with, not necessarily her. Now, where the other desire to talk to her through David to some degree, and David's desire to connect to beings other than our species is something I respect. Does I understand the difficulty? Yeah, I suppose not ideal for now. Not your connection, but in a moment. Yes, it's not easy for me currently connect in that manner. As a fact, one moment.
I appreciate that, Metax. Yeah, I understand what you mean. So when you say not really interact, is it supposed energetically, or is it just something she's going through? Is it just not being powerful enough, I suppose?
Your own energy is getting drained in that moment.
Yeah. Well, I suppose recently anyway, is that just the overall interaction that I'm having with her, or is it just how it is right now? Because
The
it seems
human connection, yes, so it has to do with your sacral and the enjoyment idea.
let's see.
So if you tend to yourself first in that regard, it would be highly recommendable.
Okay, sure. Yeah, because I was kind of interested in how that energy could play out, but as you say, I don't really want to experience the draining feeling again. So certainly, I know what you're talking about.
Yes, that's why I would greatly recommend you to tend to your own energy in that regard first, or only, really, and then let it split out from there if you want to reach, and then only those will reach you that are a vibrational match.
All right. Okay. I suppose, well, I have about 4 minutes left, but I'd like to talk a little bit about. It seems like I'm not so much getting regression of current lifetime events right now, but I suppose I'm getting some of my past life. And I remember Kang mentioning that his race, or I suppose his kind on his world, have actually interacted on Earth in ancient past. And I found that interesting is that when I was actually sketching his I suppose it's like a bust of him in a way, because like his head his upper body that I drew, but on the symbol on his chest, very closely resembles the Egyptian Ankh symbol, which I actually, at the time, had no idea about, and it almost felt. I stared at it and didn't really even know what it was or if it was even appropriate to draw that. So I was thinking about redrawing it, but for some reason I decided to keep it. And then later on, when I made the connection between the two, the similar resemblance was very close, but uncannily so. But it was. I seem to be getting, like I said, memories of being in Egypt like thousands of years ago, or at least that was my one last lifetime I had as a feline. Is that the same? If you want to just talk about that at all, if the significance of that, is that the same feline ET that's in stasis right now that I have?
It's another incarnation of yours, but the memory of having been there is very accurate. However, remember, there's no time, so those are possible to occur simultaneously.
I see. How close in energy, I suppose, in terms of associations are with the Bastet feline? Because she seems very familiar, and like at least in terms of what I'm getting now, it seems like I was something like a bodyguard for her in one instance, anyway.
Well, there were more that are subsidized on the label later on, not just her. Many that in your mythology have been labeled under that particular term. You had somewhat of a function like that was more personal, not just a bodyguard, but likely related to a degree that you were also looking after a more brotherly nature.
I see. Interesting. That explains why I got a black cat. Bagheera.
Your affinity, certainly, yes.
So does that mean that Bagheera is at all connected to those events or something?
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty awesome. Does she have any message for me before I disconnect?
First and foremost, a lot of love and appreciation for your willingness to reach out.
Is there any certain direction that my interaction with her will go in the future? Because I can kind of sense that it's rather positive and exciting, but
There's a lot of appreciation. So indeed, I would highly recommend. Also, it would do wonders for your current chakra system I mentioned previously. If you would go further in the direction, also of course, in the direction of Bushy, in your word can be a great metaphor and a tool to. I don't like to refer as a tool, but the idea of using the compassionate energy you have there to propel yourself further, if you're capable of holding it frequently, it is.
Well, I've noticed when I'm in that pleasure state, or at least especially when I don't really get too concerned about the neediness, like right?
Yes, override the neediness ideal with set a frequency of love and desire if you're able to define desire as being present and possible and not something that's removed from your experience.
I get the impression, before I go, I just want to mention that I really get the impression that lifting of the veil, I suppose, of just immediately getting very strong sort of intuitive abilities. It just seems like it doesn't seem like it's that far away. It's almost, if I carry on with this acceptance state and not really worrying too much, I just feel like things is going to change very fast for me. Is that something that you can see as well?
It will indeed. And you have to embrace the uncertainty in that way.
Will do. I really appreciate that, Metax. That was very good talk.
You're welcome. Yeah, what should I go? Of course, also always feel free to reach out to her if you want to bridge that gap more smoothly and easily. It would be great for your own energy.
Sure, I appreciate that, Metax. Much love.
Much love to you from her and me. And more water for you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Greetings, Metax, and I send my love to Saran.
Greetings, much love from here over there.
Are you aware of Wanderers from the Law of One material?
If you share more details, I might be able to comment, not with this particular term.
I guess like the most general way to explain it is just souls that have graduated from third to fourth density or from third to fifth or sixth or whatever that choose to go to different planets to help the civilization to advance to the next density level.
Yes, I understand, but that's just a definition of soul that can be applied to anybody really that remembers their higher incarnation and then wishes to define themselves in such a manner.
Okay. So in a sense, we're all wanderers, just depending on how we identify in any given moment or what we choose to remember.
You're all and you're not. It indeed depends on your definition. I wouldn't necessarily call you all wanderers in that sense. It's really a term that's not necessary.
Okay, kind of like an outdated, old-fashioned idea.
If you want to call it such, it's not really old-fashioned. Again, there's no time. It's just one way to look at reality that I would not favor, but some might find it useful.
Okay. David talks a lot about how he considers your planet his home world, so to speak, of the felines. It's like his home species. And I know we all exist as everything, and so whoever we are, like David's home world obviously is Earth, but he identifies more with your energy and the feline energy. And for myself, I asked about the whole wander idea because I feel like I don't really identify strongly with any particular species, or I feel like I'm always I'm like more diffuse, or I feel like I have more extensions than I never really feel like I have like a home. I always feel like a wanderer in that sense, and that like I'm always kind of going between different perspectives and identifying with different species and different ideas of who I am. But reading into my energy, do you feel like I have like a home planet or like a home species, or like where more of my consciousness is spent time or anything like that, or more of my energy is located?
Where David likes to define a term. In your case, you have always perhaps a more closer connection to reptiles and to some degree insectoid beings that you're simply more used to incarnating in. The same way that David sees his incarnation here as a more typical one, but it's an unusual case. In David's instance, usually there's not a body in stasis that is being kept while somebody else, Jacob case, is then being sent out. So David's treating this lifetime more like a side quest, if I interpret that correctly. It's not the usual form of incarnation in between lifetimes. However, if you're more used to one species or another, you will likely always contain more of that particular frequency throughout your life, if you wish, after you incarnate somewhere else. So in your case, it's those particular species that you likely would have a closer connection with, but to a large degree, your made acceptance of your current physical incarnation as a human on your current world, which might be helpful with grounding, but there's also sometimes your lack of also as well perhaps pleasure or self-love, etc. And also your third eye then in that connection and your inability to reach out further because again, as I mentioned earlier, it's much easier to connect to something outside your own consciousness as a human being or any other species if you have a particular individual to talk to. No matter from a higher perspective, everything is valid equally or equally valuable. from your ego mind and also from your oversoul, everything. It makes you an individual. It makes it a lot easier if you communicate also with individual or assume individual identity because you have a focal point.
Right. Okay. So you said insectoid and reptilian is more of what I'm used to?
Most likely, from what I perceive from your frequency, is
And more reptilian or more insectoid?
much more reptile, but those is fairly common.
I see. Yeah, I mean that definitely resonates. It's like interesting because in this particular lifetime I'm so empathetic, which is so contrary to reptilian frequencies, but it's also probably why this life has been kind of so hard and challenging for me because I'm used to not having any of that as a reptilian, and in this lifetime I'm have a lot of that tendency to empathize with people, and so that clashing of energies, I guess, is part of why in many ways this life has been so hard for me.
Yes. Again, the enjoyment idea would propel you forward there. Now, as you're mentioning it, yes. As the entire reptilian species, however, if we had contact with in that manner, it might then venture off in the opposite extreme. After all, you incarnated in a species that is perhaps the polar opposite or the hardest to integrate from that perspective in the first place, and that was your desire to do so. However, there was also a side to helping people in that regard. So there was already the idea of empathy, you just don't define it in such a manner from a reptilian perspective, from what I understand, at least from their culture. So willingness to sacrifice for your people is also a form of compassion, even if not necessarily defined as such in reptilian nature. So the willingness to be something that's so contrary for the benefit of people in your own world would then be something that paradoxically would prove to you the capability of first this overlap of what you then might deem compassion.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that this whole conversation has stirred a lot of energy within me, for sure.
Yes, I can
I
sense that.
Yeah, in kind of a good way, and all just a bit overwhelming, but also a lot of pride. Yeah, almost like an emotional, like just yeah, like a mix of pride and like deep emotion.
Your heart is certainly getting better from the interaction and from the awareness. If you're
Yeah.
willing to assume that identity, at least again for the moment.
Yeah,
You're
also
doing
just
well.
thank you. And also just like realizing like the dark and the light, they really aren't so different as much as they as much anguish and strife and battling happens on the physical level on those higher levels, it's really just the same thing, just different sides of the same coin.
That's a good realization. It's one way to define energy, yes. Yes, you're very much correct in your assessment.
Yes. To move on to something a little different, as far particular in America with the vaccine and the different mask protocols and whatnot, how much of that is like a true desire to for the best benefit of the people and for the health of the people, and how much of that is just about power and control with the elite?
That depends greatly on which individuals or groups you're referring to. In terms of the elite, I would assume that is 100% about control. The idea of virus, I think the reptiles previously lasted for a very short period of what you deem time, a couple of weeks perhaps. However, what's been continuing around after that is more or less a control mechanism. But however, there are many people involved in the whole process that have indeed intentions that are more positive. But talking about your top levels, if you wish, those that are implementing your whole situation on a national level or even a global scale more likely have the intention to control purely, but that's usually the intention in all aspects with everything that's going on.
Right. And then a lot of channels seem to they don't talk about conspiracy theories at all. I'm talking specifically about Bashar and some other high-level channelers, and they seem to give this idea that like the vaccine is a good idea and everything's working out okay. And I understand the power of focus and how you don't want to get too focused on negative conspiracies and whatnot. But it's hard for me to believe that, like, I feel like it's almost like their ego's getting in the way, that they're too scared to really speak the truth because they're afraid to turn away potential clients or something.
Yeah, it's also like the intention to not get involved too much with conflict with your current status quo, from what I'm picking up at least. I'm aware the reptiles love to speak about those topics to great detail. But then again, the frequency is also something that's very much a match to those types of people that are involved with such what you deem conspiracies. When I touch about such events, I always do it with the intention to give you a greater perspective, not to scare you in any way, shape, or form. And indeed, from a higher perspective, everything is indeed working out at all times, everywhere, constantly. It just always depends on your perspective. When one of our quadrupedal members in your world would kill a deer, for example, and eat them alive, then of course it's working out smoothly. But from the deer's perspective, obviously something went wrong, even though from a higher perspective, it's what has been termed in this particular movie idea, circle of life. So it always depends on your perspective. That is all I'm saying.
Right.
But indeed, yes, there are conspiracies, of course, of one way going on the other, but it doesn't change the fact that you all create your own reality and you're also asking people to oppress or control. But again, from your own personal ego perspective and from learning lessons, you don't always need to see the higher perspective. What's important is what's in front of you and what you can do in the moment.
Right. And I think that's what they're attempting to do is for, like, they feel the best way to assist the individual is to get them focused on what you just said, instead of getting too focused on who's controlling who or what exactly is going on. Because myself and many others, when you get on that train of thought, it's easy to just lower your frequency to a great degree.
Yeah, don't fall in the victim mentality.
Right, exactly.
Don't assume that others are taking control of you or you hand it over to them.
Right. And then as far, like, I know obviously David has made the decision to not channel the reptilians to nearly the same degree that he was and focus on you guys. As far as myself, and especially hearing this new information about my connection with reptilian energies in general, do you see the potential of me maybe taking the flame, so to speak, and being more of a vessel for Kalask and these other reptilian entities, kind of taking that mission on now that David has moved on? Do you see that as a possibility? Or if that's even useful for me?
It's possible. Greatly depends on what I shared earlier in terms of your willingness to take pride in your identity, and the moment that you flared up there for a moment and you got into a frequency that would make it more possible. However, I have to warn you, in the idea of encompassing that frequency more fully, then it will likely also influence your physical life to a greater degree. I'm just speaking here from the effect of David and his attempt to further embody this frequency. It is certainly possible for you to reach out to them at any time, so they have given previously examples through David to a great degree of how to do so, and you're certainly capable of. If you're starting to bring them through, however, you will also put yourself in a completely different frequency, and that's more of an experiment, but it greatly depends on how far you're able to get to the bright state you were earlier in. It's that much more adjusting to their frequency, and if you're capable of holding your heart open at the same time, as this might inflict with your current empathy stage that you previously described. There's also some aspects in your addictive nature you previously judged yourself for, so all of those things combined are something you would have to work on, but everything is possible, as I shared, and it's certainly not too far-fetched for you to be able to hold at least somewhat of this frequency. But again, take care of your own energy while you're in the process and be very aware of what effect it has on you and your own consciousness. That's what I would suggest.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'll definitely feel into that and decide if it's a direction I want to move into. I mean, I definitely feel a pretty constant telepathic communication with Kalask at this point, but there's definitely times where it can definitely fry my battery, so to speak, and be very, very unpleasant. And so it's definitely something I need practice with to do it properly and stay grounded and stay open-hearted. I've noticed in the class book, they seemed, from my perspective, they seemed a lot more open-hearted when that book was written compared to like later channelings.
The connection with David simply got much stronger, so therefore more energy coming through, up to a point where David then therefore found it more and more difficult to hold their frequency, as there was simply more percentage of them coming through. The same way with us, of course, but in our case it's easier because one, our frequency is person is training on the heart, or at all, I would hope. However, David also having a stronger connection to us, defining this world here as his real home world, and sometimes there's some sadness in him, but it's not on our side, it's just him also feeling this connection. But overall, it's a positive experience, and the stronger he connects to us, the more likely. However, the book idea that we are also working on is very difficult for him to maintain a frequency, which is why he also gets tired occasionally to a similar degree as when connecting to reptiles, however, only in that fashion. And something that all I notice while I work with him as well as others, we're all just going along through this process, is that the more frequency comes through, the higher the percentage, the clearer the channeling, if you will, the more of the entity is coming through and the less of his own ego gets in the way, the more the energy stays afterwards and has an influence on his own consciousness, and the more difficult it also became to hold the frequencies of such different species. It also had to deal with a hybrid program, the conflict that emerged there, and numerous such instances.
Okay. And then we've got about 3 minutes left. I'm feeling a little bit sick. Can you tell me what sickness I have? Feels like a cold, like a little bit, maybe a fever.
In your throat. Well, of course, I can refer you to a doctor in your word, etc., and you have similar diagnosis. Perhaps there's something in an infection idea in your throat. However, I would refer to the energy, and that's obviously your immune system being connected to the heart. If you're there tanking on your empathy, and of course your throat chakra and clear expression, that might affect you right there. Also has to do with your self-love idea, not so much just in general, but more your physical body. Love towards your physical form is something you might want to increase. Everything is an energetic imbalance before it becomes anything physical. So if you just give love to your physical form, that's the best way to resolve it, whatever it is.
Right. Yeah, I'm not like super concerned that it's like COVID or whatever. It actually in some ways feels kind of nice. It's in some ways connecting me to my inner child when I was sick when I was young and being catered for. It's like slightly altering my consciousness in a way that's actually somewhat enjoyable. And I'm still able to exercise, and so it's not that big of a deal. But thank you, Metax, and yeah, much love. And yeah, I definitely just ask for your assistance along my channeling with if I choose to interact with the reptilians more. Just help me out because I know how challenging that can be. So much love to you and your kind.
Much love to your inner child as well. Take care.
Let's see if David needs some water.
That's a good idea. Thank you, reminder. Much better.
Hi, Metax. Nice talking to you.
Greetings, Ananda. If you could speak up some more, it would be appreciated.
Do you hear me better?
Somewhat, you're still somewhat silent, but I can speak and I can communicate with you in such a manner.
Yeah, I have very silly question today. Why not? I was wondering, what would that possibly mean if I see myself in a dream as somebody completely different? Like, would it be some message from some higher self or something symbolic? I remember it happened about a few months ago that I had a very vivid dream when I knew I was Justin Bieber, and I'm not fan of him. I barely know his music. Whatever he means, really nothing to me in my waking life. But I remember I even saw myself in a mirror. It was something like almost like some completely different storylines from somewhere else. So I thought, would you have some perspective what this kind of dream means? What type of symbolism or message it is?
Most likely some connection to an obviously more masculine incarnation of yours, not necessarily this particular human in your world, but someone who might look similar or your mind's energetically you. So not so much who this person is in his current incarnation, but more what he represents. It also has to do with your inner child to a large degree. As we're just transitioning over there from Zachariah. It's slightly of a coincidence that you're starting the interaction in a similar frequency range of a similar topic as the previous one ended.
Yes, that's somehow similar.
Now your voice is getting very silent. I don't think anybody else is picking up when you're speaking.
Yes, I said the previous talk sounded somehow similar.
Yes. And likely here you're in a child version, and also obviously more masculine nature. Could also be a parallel incarnation of yours. Not that you have a parallel incarnation as your individual of Justin Bieber, but more the idea of what you see in this person is likely easiest represented in that perception of this individual in comparison to who you are or you're choosing to be in another life in such a perhaps similar physical format, but more in the energy. So not necessarily that you look in any way, shape, or form like it, but more that you have an incarnation of a sort that's energetically resembled by your perception of this individual in your world currently.
Yeah, I thought there might be some symbolism going on, yes.
Well, everything in your dream is always somewhat symbolic at all times. It just depends on how you're interpreting them, and of course, sometimes you have indeed visionary dreams, which then can be future or past memories that you're otherwise not aware of, but ultimately they're always symbolic in every way.
Yes, I was somewhat surprised by the realism and vividness of the dream.
Yes, it sometimes occurs. I'm also just going through David's mind, memories, etc. This is more normally a fourth dimension. And you're more in that state, and your physical form also becomes more changeable.
Okay. Also, could I ask similar question like Zach before? Do I have some connections, some soul connections with some other places apart of Earth?
Well, you all do to some degree or the other. It depends if you're more used to them. Many are stuck in the reincarnation cycle of Earth and reincarnate over and over again. You can, of course, then use fancy labels for like Wanderer or others, as mentioned previously. Yes, we don't on other worlds more frequently. From what I'm aware, not exclusively. I've been on Earth as well before. However, you obviously also have a strong desire for the connection with our kind, and you feel drawn to our species for a reason. You also have a certain connection with other furry-like beings, which is hard to compare to something in your world. Perhaps more of a lupine nature, but not quite. Also, perhaps fox or something not quite comparable to any animal beings in your world. I'm just looking for words and terms in David's mind while I'm speaking. However, you're used to having fur to some degree over a while from your time perception of incarnations, but obviously your strongest connection is still with our species here, not necessarily with this world and our race here on Sigbar, but in general the feline beings, as you have also been present, just as the Jacob person mentioned earlier, in your Egyptian region in such a form.
Past.
Speaking is more breaking up and silent again, so if you could get closer perhaps to your technology or speak up louder, appreciate it also for others.
I think that connection, would that be something you consider?
Please repeat.
Would those troubles or incarnations be from the past?
Well, it depends how you define your lifetime. From your current linear perspective, very likely, yes.
Okay, it was quite interesting description.
There could also, of course, be a future, but remember, it depends from what vantage point you're looking. But from your current perspective, you would likely define it as past in your world. But again, it's not unusual for people to reincarnate on the same planet for quite a while, or reincarnations. But some people don't do that and only incarnate once in one species. I'm aware that many in your world currently have been there for a while or incarnate in other worlds in similar forms, etc. But when you feel drawn to another physical form, that's usually the best indicator.
So it was actually my choice to be on the earth at this time.
That is everybody's choice to be there at this time, especially those that have come there to lend assistance, if you will, from a higher perspective at least, even if they get carried away with one or the other thing. No one was forced to volunteer.
Now, sometimes I thought maybe I got caught on some cosmic scam.
Yes, I'm much aware. David has mentioned that to us previously also many times due to his unhappiness with his current state in your world, but mostly as the physical human form, which is very unusual, which I can to some degree understand, and to some degree not so much, but I understand the unusualness of it. And sometimes you do get stuck, but you're only scamming yourself, ultimately.
Hey, I thought self-deception.
Yes, that's a better way to term it. You can create the illusion of being stuck somewhere, and then you indeed are.
What did you say about those fairy-like beings? I'm just curious. What do they look like? What are they busy with?
If you're referring to the beings in your world and interacting with your nature spirits, etc., which we also previously mentioned by Jacob, well, they're interacting with your world, obviously, as they're somewhat of overseers as well. They're connected to your planetary body in a way. They're also able to transition beyond your physical plane and go off-world, but it's very unusual, and they have certain limitations, as you do. There are different words that have been used in your languages for those entities in various cultures. And sometimes those descriptions overlap with physical visitors, etc. And there's a lot of misinterpretation with those words and phrases. Same, for example, Bigfoot or Sasquatch idea, which has also been used for different entities that have been created for various purposes and exist in your world and often lumped together in your perception, similar with those.
So they were somewhat connected with my previous adventures, as you told before.
You could see it that way, that your previous incarnations, as you like to call them, there were not many of them present, however, in your other incarnations, as far as I'm aware. I think you're reaching out more through them from your current vantage point, for your own reasons.
Unknowingly, maybe.
Yeah, you have more common incarnation with fur-like beings, not necessarily those type of nature spiritual entities. However, you have at least somewhat of a connection to your fauna.
Yes.
If that's what you're referring to.
Somehow, yeah. Yeah, I was kind of always almost certain that those things exist and on some level.
There is also a way to communicate with other worlds through those entities. Not so much because they are doing it consciously, but because they are connected to other worlds or other entities of a similar nature in another world. So it is more not quite like some of our companions that we have in your world, that you can also sometimes interact with physically to interact with us, to communicate with us, when there can be an overshadowing of the entity, because you don't necessarily communicate with high advanced species in another world, but other beings that are on a similar nature as those nature spirits, if you will, in another world, and they're not necessarily doing it as consciously, but nonetheless you can establish a connection in such a manner.
Oh, so there are there are things in common energetically between you guys.
Between several worlds, yes.
Yes, it's interesting.
Same way, for example, also trees grow in your world are not too uncommon. Some of them can also exist, or at least something similar in other worlds where there is such a vegetation possible.
Would you say that there is like some planetary bodies occupied by what we might call fairies?
Yes, indeed. I wasn't referring to those entities earlier when I talked to you, since I was referring more to your general tendency to incarnate yourself as different entities of another nature, not particularly those spirits, but as you have an interest in them, I can also share more about those if you desire. And they indeed exist in numerous worlds, and they do communicate with each other telepathically also over the distance. However, that doesn't happen as consciously as, for example, I'm speaking right now.
Yes, interesting.
It's more bleeds through.
Yeah, I always thought I might have some connections like that, but it was more like not conscious. It was a hint, not a conscious thought.
A hint. So that's another way to put it. A hint, or perhaps inclination, a desire without knowledge.
Yes, desire without knowledge. Like I think I'm getting this from people that my looks are being linked with what they perceive of elves or something like that.
As a possible well. It's like not your physical appearance, but the energy you give off, which then prompts the person to give you that feedback. Remember, you manifest everything in your world, including the interaction with other humans that are feedbacking to you.
Yes. And also their perception of what it is from their imagination.
Yes, to some degree, but remember, whatever they're expressing is also your imagination. It's always a co-creation, but it's very correct. What they see in you is also their own.
Yeah.
But then again, whatever you're picking up from their description is something that you're projected. It's all about co-creation.
Yeah, it was mostly a hint.
Mm-hmm.
Would you have anything else quickly to share?
I'm working on your frequency as we speak to increase that connection to the greatest ability possible that I currently have in order to bridge that gap. As you voiced the desire, I've been reaching out. There are others in other worlds that also have a certain desire to communicate with you, but if you wish to communicate with those entities first, that is something that we can arrange. However, remember, they don't have necessarily the same consciousness level, but if you wish to reach out to beings in other worlds, it's also much possible to use them as a stepping stone, so to speak. The same way some have also used other biological robots, for example, as intermediate device, or the way I'm perhaps using David right now to some degree, but it's quite different that he's more aware of it, at least when he's not currently in the very same state that he's in right now.
Yeah, it's good to know.
Mm-hmm.
I always appreciate your insights, and it's very strange that recently I thought that when I first heard about you, it was when I was consciously looking for some psychotherapist or something, some guidance like that. And then you appear. It's funny.
Well, in one way or the other, I understand that the sharing that I have with your world can have perhaps that effect that some people are looking for when they reach out to such an individual. However, I'm not so much aware from David's interaction as beings in your world, as well as his own experiences, the connection to the non-physical in such a manner as we're having right now, right here, or to beings such as myself through such a metaphysical, if you will, function is often more helpful than your mere physical human-to-human interaction in your world, at least from my experience. It's not the main reason for my desire of interacting with your world, but it obviously is part and parcel of the process, apparently.
Yeah, somehow I'm not directly comparing with you, but there is. I thought you would find it funny.
It is peculiar.
It is.
So if you want to have such a therapy, if you will, is of course something that's possible if you want to reach to me directly, or again, of course, in the manner that we are speaking right now through David, is something I can aid you along if you come to me
Yes,
with that frequency.
thank you for your vibes, and yeah, it's always fun connecting with you.
You're very welcome. Also, make sure you tend to your own frequency first, and then let it spill over to others. Self-love is absolutely essential, no matter if you work with other entities or not.
Thank you for this chat, and talk to you soon.
Talk to you another moment in your time, if you will. Bye for now.
Much love.
Much love.
And if David needs some water.
Mm.
And we have about About 5 more minutes. So I'm wondering, I just wanted to open it and see if anyone on the call wanted to ask one last question. We have about 5 minutes. Is anybody interested?
So Metax, I was just curious because my cat got a little bit sick yesterday, and I didn't really know what that was. Like, she's just started vomiting a little bit, and then sort of it looked like she was a bit drowsy. Didn't really want me to come near her or anything, and then later on she started getting her eyes clearing up again. I sort of checked the mucous membrane and everything to see the capillary refill time. So she seems to have like blood flowing pretty quickly through her. It's not like she has any clotting or anything like that. I'm not sure what that was. Is she just having like a reaction to energy? Because I suppose I actually kind of had I was in a similar state not too long ago. Just interested in your perspective of what was going on in her energy.
No. There are some, yes, they are transmuting energy. Always in your world, there are some digestive issues you might want to tend to. However, in the energetic perspective, it is very common for felines in your world, especially if they dwell in the same household, to transmute your frequency. So she's picking up from you as well.
Mm-hmm. So I thought, yeah, it didn't seem like it was anything. Well, like I always say, like I seem to wake up with her. I can always tell whether she's truly sick or not. And I didn't never really get that impression, especially when.
Yeah, she has also an idea in your world called Reiki, your Japanese tradition. That's something you can do for her, but she's also doing for you. You can do it for each other. However, someone needs to transmute the energy and give it off. If she's not doing it, then somebody else has to.
Sure. Okay. I can certainly do that. Thank you, Metax.
You're very welcome. Much love to her as well. And I will also chime in if I can reach her at any time. I'm picking up some frequency.
Yeah, I just want to message you something.
So, Metax, do you have something that you would like to state to us as a final happy note?
It's sending energy to her, and I hope it's having an effect. In general, people in your world currently are obviously undergoing a lot of turmoil. Most of it is your projection onto each other, more than anything else that you're currently manifesting. You obviously also have the problems, overpopulation that's still to be addressed, that you're also keep creating new problems for, but that's something you need to come to terms with in your own species, how far you wish to produce in your world, especially in certain regions, more so than others. That's something that you might want to tend to as an entire species, but I don't know how much I can relate this to your entire collective by speaking words through David in this manner, other than reaching out directly.
Thank you. Seems to be working. It's reacting differently.
I hope so.
Well, thank you, Metax, for the interaction today, and much love to you, as you know, and also Kitash, and I appreciate you being here today.
Much love from Kitash, and much love from me to you and your world, and thank you for the co-creation. You can speak directly if you can reach out, and otherwise I will see you all again in your time frame of months, or any of you that want to speak to me in your so-called meantime. Goodbye. Much love for now.
Much love.
Much love, Metax.
Love.
Much love.
Bushy.